Well, hello. It's Miss Dominy again. Hope y'all had a really good day and a good night. We're gonna just go right in on chapter 2 of Death Cave. And I will tell you that this chapter is a little bit long, yes, but there's lots of important clues and things that we need to know in this chapter to make the book make sense. So, all right, chapter 2. There was a little bridge around the back of the school. Brian followed Gary across it. On the other side, they squeezed between the end of the bridge and the brick incinerator where the janitor burned the trash. They moved beside the stream that flowed under the bridge until they came to the place where the rock banks dropped off sharply. They could hear water bubbling and churning its way through the narrow gorge the stream had cut. Turning sideways, they followed the creek. They squeezed and climbed their way down almost straight drop to their private place at the bottom of the steep canyon. The pit is what they called it. It was a small pool of water. A sheer rock cliff surrounded it like a horseshoe. The top of the cliff was a good 12 feet above their heads, and the walls were smooth and slick as could be. The little stream that had cut it from the solid stone was so small it didn't have a name. Sometimes during the dry summer it slowed down to just a trickle, but the pit never dried up because of the sandbar on the other side. The stream came from someplace up in one of the mountains and flowed into Medicine Creek. Over the years, this stream had pulled up chunks of rock and sand and gravel between the pit and the river. It was kind of like a natural dam that separated them. When the stream stopped flowing, the water from the Medicine Creek would seep back through the sand and rock and keep the pit full of fresh, clean water. There were cattails growing on the far side of the sandbar. They were so thick that nobody on the other bank, or even in a boat out in the middle of the river, could see it. About the only way in was through the steep gorge where the boys had just come from. Even then, you had to be a good rock climber to work your way down the gorge and into the pit. It wasn't an easy place to get to. Near the bottom, Gary made his way around the edge of the horseshoe to the sandbar. Brian followed him, clinging to the rock wall like a fly until the dry ground was under him. Even when they were safe on the sandbar, Gary's nervous eyes scanned the ridge above them. Tight, cautious eyes. Eyes searching for the slightest movement, the slightest sign that someone might be spying on them. Brian lay on his stomach. The sandbar was low enough to be shielded from the bite of the brisk spring breeze. The bright sun had warmed the sand. It was good against Brian's bare arms. It took a long time for Gary to get settled, to finally satisfy himself that there was no one else around. While Brian waited, Gary kicked his grungy tennis shoes off, dug his toes down into the hot sand. At last, he eased over next to Brian and pulled a crumpled yellow envelope from his pocket. The paper was brittle, cracked, and colored with age. Inside the envelope was a thin white sheet of paper with lines and a big X on it. Gary handled it as he would the wings of a butterfly. "It's rice paper," he whispered as he unfolded it. "If you ain't careful, it'll tear." He spread it on the sand for Brian to look at. There were lines marking a trail. On one side there were some jagged lines, like the peaks of a mountain, and right in the middle was the big X. "This is the map overlay that shows where the snake dancer's gold is," Gary said. He closed the paper carefully and quickly stuck it back in the envelope. Then he pulled out 2 more pieces of paper. "This is the note Grandpa left. It tells all about the map and how to use the overlay. Grandpa left them for us. See, our names are on the outside of the envelope." Brian scooted closer. He held his breath, listening with excitement. He'd heard Grandpa's story about the snake dancer's gold before, but he'd always thought it was just a story, a make-believe kind of story that Grandpa told them on days when the weather was so bad and they couldn't go outside. Gary paused. He frowned as he noticed the look on Brian's face. "Well, I never figured it was a real story either," he confessed. "But this letter Grandpa left says different. Listen." Brian followed along while Gary read. Grandpa's handwriting wasn't too good, so his friend did a lot of frowning and head scratching trying to figure what the words said. Gary read words in a soft voice. Every now and then, he'd stop and look up at the ridge of rock above them, like he was still checking to make sure nobody was watching. As Brian listened, it was almost like Grandpa was there with him, like it was him telling the story, just as he had so many times before. "Well, it could have been as far back as the start of the Civil War, but to the best of my recollection, like the time old Fort Sill was opening up, and when the first railhead came to the little town called Rush Springs. Anyhow, the exact time it all happened ain't all that important. Some of the facts has got sort of messed up, what with the passing of time and all, but there's one fact that's for sure. A shipment of gold coin was stolen from the wagon someplace between the railroad at Rush Springs and the army base at Fort Sill. I looked it up in some of these old records, and the missing gold shipment was written down. Nobody knows exactly how much was on the wagon. Somehow, the shipments had got all messed up. There was 6 months' pay for the soldiers at the fort. I figured it out more'n once, and near as I can count, there must have been somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million of gold on that wagon. I first heard the story about the gold when I was 10. Me and a friend named Chancey Becker snuck down to the Indian meeting grounds and crawled up behind the big meeting teepee. I know I told you and Brian about the meeting grounds. They used to be on the ball diamond behind Medicine Park School. Remember the time we went and found them arrowheads? Brian closed his eyes. He could almost see Gary and Grandpa and him digging around the middle of the ball diamond with their shovels. He hadn't really believed Grandpa when he told them Indians used to have their powwows there, but after they dug around a time, they found an arrowhead, and Brian started believing them, with a shrug of his shoulders as he chased the memories out of his head and turned back to listen to the rest of Grandpa's story. Well, the Indians, they got a good way of remembering things. Instead of writing stuff down and taking a chance on getting it lost, they tell it to others. If anything big was going on, everybody what heard the story remembered it and told somebody else. Hunters and warriors told their hunters and warriors they ran into on the trails. Squaws told squaws and braves. Grandmothers passed it down to their children and grandkids around campfires in front of them teepees. The words and the exact things what happened gets around some, changed around some, but it's remembered like for a long time. It's called a legend. That's why I heard it when I was young. It went something like this. When again life comes, the brothers of the snake go to their secret place in the mountains. Some who have not seen many summers have never visited the place, for they can only go when the waters fall strong and the lands flood. It is at this time that the secret place bursts forth and water sprays from the mountains. At this time, and only at this time, may the brothers of the snake visit the secret place. The old medicine man who told the story that night in the teepee said few know the place, for there are few who can call themselves brother. These few take the others there, to dance and make their magic. They talk with the evil spirits and the spirits of darkness, death, and pain. But the spirits are evil. They do not listen. Instead, they spread their evil to all who come. Many of the brothers never leave the place. When the dancing and making of magic is done, the ones who live chase the evil spirits into the mountain. Then they stop the waters from pouring and lock the spirits away, so their evil cannot spread to the others of the tribes. Brian tugged at Gary's arm. Gary paused and looked up at him. What? Brian frowned. Well, I don't understand all that stuff. What stuff? About the evil spirits and the Indians chasing them back into the mountain? What does it mean? Gary rattled the note in his hand. Well, Grandpa will explain some of it later. Just listen, will you? With a shrug, Brian nodded, turning back his attention to Grandpa's letter. It was at a time such as this, a time just before the waters burst forth from the mountain, that the white men discovered the secret cave. As the brothers drew near the ending of their ceremony, the white men came to hide the stolen gold. Many of the brothers were lying dead from their fight with the evil ones. They had come to make war with the evil spirits, and not the white man's rifles. Most were weak, ready to give their last strength to drive the evil spirits back into the mountain. Without warning, the white men swooped in and killed the ones who remained, killed all save one. Ch.2, shaman of the Apache, brother of the snake. With a bullet near his heart, he alone clung to life. Wounded and dying, he lay quiet, as though life had already departed for the spirit world. He watched as the whites carried sack after sack of gold into the mountain. Then they left, but in a short time they returned with more sacks. Ch.2 heard that they would leave and return once more with the last of their stolen gold. There they would hide it until they could safely return. They knew nothing of the evil spirits who lived within the mountain, and Ch.2 knew their greed would not let them stay away long before they returned. He knew also that the time was not long for the brothers of the snake. Already many of the evil ones had escaped the mountain. If the others were not driven back and the mountain closed, soon the evil was spread through all the land. Pain and death would come to many. He also knew that if the whites, in their ignorance, were to open the place again, nothing could stop the evil. The brothers of the snake were no more. There would be no one to drive the eagle back where it lived. When the whites returned the last time, Ch.2 followed them into the mountain. Many say his magic was strongest of all the shaman. With this great magic, he caused the earth to tremble, the mountain to close. The evil spirits were again locked up in their mountain home. So were the white men and their cursed gold. So also was Ch.2. The brave deed of Ch.2 took the courage of a spirit, not a man. It is true, some say that Ch.2 was a spirit, a soul not of this life. Even the brothers of the snake fear the evil which dwells within the mountain, When Histaka gave his life to seal the evil inside, he had to seal himself inside also. Close out the light, there to die alone with the evil spirits all around. The evil of the white men, the evil that comes of the white man's gold, and the evil that dwells inside the mountain. Me and Chancey Becker were just a couple of kids when we heard the old Indian telling the story. We was getting a little scared what with the spooky story the old medicine man was telling. We was also thinking about what them Indians might do to us if they was to catch us spying on their private meeting. We was just fixing to sneak off from underneath the teepee when we heard the last part of the story, the part about the curse. The medicine man's eyes got real big and funny looking when he told that part. It is said that before Histaka died, he summoned all his magic and brought forth a curse on the white man and his gold, a curse on all who might find it and try to take it from their sacred place, a curse on all who might live now and who are not now born, that if they open the mountain and release the evil spirits, they shall die a slow and painful death, a curse on all that is within the mountain, and death to anyone who takes so much as one coin, one rifle, one arrow from it, and a curse on any Indian who breathes the name Histaka before the ears of a white man. For the white man's greed will not allow him to believe the legend, and he would search out the evil. The name Histaka is to be spoken of only by the Indian from now until time is no more. Right along then, me and Chancey Becker got to feeling the chills running up and down my back. We lit out of there in a hurry, figuring the Indians were liable to see us any second. But we heard the story about the curse of the snake dancer's gold. We heard the story, and we never forgot it. It had taken Gary a long time to read Grandpa's story. Ryan had been sitting very still. Now he noticed his back was hurting a bit from being so stiff. His elbows were getting raw from propping them under his head in the sand. He stretched and got to his feet. Well, I remember Grandpa telling us a story once when we were studying about Indians in school. I told my teacher about the legend. And, Gary urged him on, and my teacher said that only the Navajo and the Hopi Indians did that snake dancing stuff. She said that they never lived in Oklahoma, not even when it was mostly an Indian reservation. Gary smiled. My teacher said that the Kiowa Indians were the only ones who lived in Oklahoma a long time ago. She said about the same thing your teacher did. I told Grandpa about it. Brian leaned closer. Well, so what'd you say? Grandpa says there's a lot the white men don't know about the Indians. But there's more that only the Indians know that they won't never tell about. Really? Yeah, he said. Only the shamans or medicine man knew about the secret place. He said, there's lots of stuff the Indian tribes keep secret, but there's stuff that the shamans even kept secret from their own tribes. You know, special medicines and things about the spirits and stuff that they didn't even tell the chief about. Brian felt a tingle at the back of his neck. Well, I'm glad Grandpa wrote the story down for us. But what about that other piece of paper? That real thin stuff? What'd you say it was? Rice paper. Oh, yeah. What's that for? There was another piece of paper under the one Grandpa had written his story on. Gary unfolded it, and Brian frowned. They'd been lying on the sandbar for a long time, and Brian didn't like being that still, and he didn't really want to listen to another story. What's that? Gary handed the paper to him. Well, it's the rest of Grandpa's story. Want to hear it? Brian scratched his head. Well, I'm kind of tired sitting. Why don't you just tell me what it says? Okay, Gary shrugged. He stuffed the paper back in his pocket and pulled his shoes on. Then he got up, stretching as Brian had done. Real slow, they started walking toward the narrow gorge that led out of the pit, back the way they came. Gary paused. He picked up a little rock and tossed it into the pool of water. Well, Grandpa said that in that letter that he had a long black folder with maps in it. He said that he and Ch.2 Becker had decided that they'd find the gold and get rich. So every place they looked, they kept a map in it. When they were through searching one spot, they'd mark it off the map so they wouldn't look there again. He said that about 10 years ago, he and Chancey found out that somebody had been following them. So they made 2 sets of maps and split up. That way, whoever was watching them couldn't follow so closely. Gary pitched another rock at the pool of water, then started up the narrow split in the rock. He talked over his shoulder as he climbed. Well, he said that he knows for a fact that the curse was true. A feller named Macamelli stumbled on at the place where the gold was hid about 9 years back. He even brought a handful of it into town, showing it around. But before he could ever get back there for the rest, or tell anybody where it came from, he got killed by a hit-and-run driver. 8 years ago, Grandpa's friend, Ch.2 Becker, got killed in a hunting accident. Nobody knew who shot him, but when they found him and brought him back to town, there were some gold coins in his pocket. Grandpa said that Chancey's wife knew where the gold was, but she was too afraid of the curse. She'd never tell anybody. Gary groaned as he pulled himself over the top of the cliff. Brian followed him. At the top of the pit, they both looked around. Well, what about that thin piece of paper you showed me? Brian asked. Well, it's an overlay. What's that mean? Well, the paper's so thin you can see clear through it. Up at the very top it says page 59. I figured that Grandpa found the gold and made that overlay. If we look on page 59 of Grandpa's maps and put the overlay on top of it, we'll know exactly where the snake dancer's gold is hidden. Brian felt his eyes bug out. You mean all that gold? He broke off because a big knot had come up in his throat. Yep. Well, Brian was stuttering so hard he could barely get the words out. Let's go get the maps and, Well, we can't. Gary cut him off. Brian frowned. Why not? Well, they're not there. Well, what do you mean they're not there? Gary shrugged. Somebody stole them. Stole them? Brian gasped. Who? When? Gary patted the letter he had folded up in his pocket. Grandpa said that he had found the gold. He also said that when he was coming down from the mountain, he found tracks and he knew there had been somebody following him. He said that when he woke up the next morning, he found a tear in the window screen where somebody had tried to break into his room. They got spooked or something and didn't get nothing. He figured whatever it was they were after, it was his maps. So he made that overlay on the rice paper and hid it. Then he marked out the place on the map, so if somebody got it, they'd think that he'd already looked there and hadn't found anything. Well, first off, you said Grandpa's maps got stole? Well, did you say nothing got stole? Ron scratched his head. Which really happened? Gary sneered at him. Well, nothing got took the first time. I found the letter to us hid in my tackle box. Grandpa must have stuck it there the night he died, the night he went fishing. Anyhow, last Monday, about a week after Grandpa's funeral, I went with Mom and Dad to gather his belongings and store it in our attic. I was in his room looking for the black case with the maps. Only when I got there, I found another screen torn up and a different window opened. Outside, I saw some tracks in the dirt. Tracks where somebody had crawled in the window. They must have broke in while we were at his funeral. Broke in and stole Grandpa's maps. Ryan bit his lower lip. But who? Who could have done it? Gary shrugged. Well, I don't know who, but I bet whoever it was the same person who killed Grandpa. Gary's eyes got real tight. The anger turned his face a bright color of red. Ryan put his hands on his hips, glaring back at Gary. Well, how do you know that's what really happened? Dad told me that when your dad called to tell us what had happened, he explained that Grandpa had slipped on the rocks while he was fishing and drowned. Maybe whoever stole the maps didn't have nothing to do with Grandpa's death. Maybe it really was an accident. Gary shook his head. It wouldn't. Well, you sure? I'm sure. Ryan shrugged. Well, everybody else says it was an accident. How can you be so sure it wouldn't? Okay, we're going to stop there for today. And we are almost through Chapter 2. It is rather long, as I said, yes. But we did need to know about the Indians and about the curse and about the gold and about the map and the fact that Gary thinks that Grandpa got killed instead of it being an accident. And probably he thinks he got killed because they were looking for the maps that they didn't find. Anyway, so make sure that you're working on those vocabulary words and getting those definitions done and the pictures done. And I will read to you tomorrow. Have a good evening.